Hello, welcome to History 101 final exam review video for the summer 2024. Question number 1 from lecture 11, assess the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. What you'll do is you've read the textbook, OpenStax textbook chapter on Thomas Jefferson. I gave you a bunch of notes. You had you have a PowerPoint video, and so from your study of Thomas Jefferson, looking over all those items, you have popular history. You can do your own studying as well, kind of what you think of Thomas Jefferson, and then you assess his presidency and kind of look it over. Most historians, like you put 10 historians of the U.S. in a room, 9 out of 10 would put Thomas Jefferson in the top 3 of El Presidentes, and Los Presidentes, I guess. And so what you want to do there is kind of, what do you think? Okay, and you can think whatever you want. I'm just telling you, most historians, that the general narrative, the popular narrative for historians is that 9 out of 10 would give him the top 3. I personally don't care. I don't have a strong opinion of Thomas Jefferson, so you can think whatever you want. Like him, hate him, whatever. I do personally put him in the top 5, mainly just for cultural reasons. He's a founding father, Constitution, and just in general, 9 out of 10 history books like Thomas Jefferson. So, but anyways, so hey, just kind of, what do you think of his presidency? Strong, good, negative, blah, blah, blah. Would you vote for him? Kind of whatever you think there. Next, describe the development of American nationalism in the early 19th century. Again, I give you a video about kind of understanding 19th century America. You've studied early 19th century America, and actually you've studied, you've studied the first half of the 19th century. And so describe what aspects of the development of this idea of American culture. And you can bring up things like, this idea of assimilation, becoming American. So you want to deal with the definition, right? Early 19th century Americans created a definition of what an American was, right? They came up with what their founding stories were. The Pilgrims, Plymouth Colony, the Pilgrims, the Founding Fathers. For 19th century Americans, the Founding Fathers were the Revolutionary War generation, or Founding Father, Revolutionary War generation. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but deified. Not by much. Not exaggeration by much. But how does that lionizing, venerating, the Revolutionary War generation, how does that affect the development of American culture, right? How does, we talked about the Transportation Revolution, the American system with Henry Clay, you want to mention that. Transportation Revolution, Judicial Review, the John Marshall Supreme Court, creating this idea that the Supreme Court and constitutional law will form the foundation of an American legal system, right? And so that's the whole point here. How do you go from a bunch of British people, Europeans, other people, in British North America, and then you go to, well, we're not British anymore. Well, what are you? We're American. How do you, how does that change, right? And you see that even when you study African American history. You see that, the Americanization, How do you develop a African American culture? You see that as you study that as well. One of the best books for that I've talked about, African Founders by David Hackett Fisher, really delves into that. But, how do you develop this idea of what an American is, this definition, right? And then we talk about reform movements, every institution, schools, prisons, asylums, churches, everything. And I remember we even told you, like, even defenders of slavery before the Civil War even argued that even the institution of slavery was beneficial to creating Americans, creating this definition of American culture. And so just talk about the development. How does the Industrial Revolution create this American culture as well, right? And we talked about the idea of separate spheres, right? The Industrial Revolution, pre-colonial America, everyone worked at home on the farm, right? And so with the Industrial Revolution, it takes the husband, the father, the man to the factory, and then says this idea of Republican motherhood, this idea that the morals of children, how do you create Americans? How do you create God-fearing Americans who love grandma, apple pie, and baseball? So you can take a look at the idea of separate spheres, this idea that you're creating America, and how the Industrial Revolution kind of creates that ideal, right? So there's all kinds of things you can talk about. Monroe Doctrine, just as you're studying this era, the pre-Civil War America, you see this development of what an American is, right? And so you want to kind of talk about what you think the major aspects of that are. Lecture 14. Lecture 14, Assess the Presidency of Andrew Jackson. Again, like Jefferson, you've delved into him, you've studied him. I showed you some videos. There's one YouTube video I thought about sharing with you, but I didn't like the title of it. Thought it was a little biased and weird. If you want to look it up, you can. I was thinking about sharing it with you. The title of it's Andrew Jackson and the Reign of Terror. And that's the main reason why I decided to share. But if you want more information, you can look it up on YouTube, or you can email me and I'll send you the link to it. I didn't like the video. I thought it was a little overly dramatic. It's like. So the historian in me went like, what? That kind of immediately killed it for me. But anyways, so you've watched some stuff about Andrew Jackson, you've studied him, and so you want to assess the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Historians have generally, since Andrew Jackson's lifetime, historians have loved, probably to an inappropriate degree, Andrew Jackson. In the last 25 years, Andrew Jackson has gone through some reassessment. He's dropped a little bit. He's kind of being reassessed in the last 25 years, but even still, he still ranks pretty high for most historians. There is a book, I think one of the best recent books about Andrew Jackson. I can't remember the name of the author, but the title is The First Populist. The First Populist. And I thought it was a good book. I thought it was well argued. I thought it was, pretty solidly argued. And so I can see that. I can see this idea of Andrew Jackson being the first populist. And anyways, and then that book is kind of part of that reassessment too. But anyways, kind of what do you think of the presidency of Andrew Jackson? And I know most students kind of know what you're going to say. For most students today, owning slaves and thinking Indians should live in Oklahoma, kind of two major strikes, I guess. And in the past, historians have overlooked that. And I know most students today tend not to, even historians. So, and if that's part of your calculus, mention that, talk about that, address that. Why, if he's a bad president because of those things, well, I mean, what are you expecting? He lived in the 19th century, you got to deal with, well, what are you expecting? I mean, are you expecting him to live? Were you expecting somebody living in the 19th century to have 21st century ideas? And that's so I want you to address that. If that's part of your calculus, I think you should also address your own personal biases of why you expect people who didn't live in this era to have this era's ideas. And I think that's a problem for a lot of even historians today. Is they study the past and they get mad at people in the past for not having 21st century views on things. How dare you? So put in your calculus. What is your calculus of a good or bad president? The presidency of Andrew Jackson. We went over his economic policies. His economic policies, while popular at the time, that's the first populist, his policies led to an economic downturn, which, interestingly enough, historians generally don't blame him for. They blame Martin Van Buren, his successor. But historians generally don't like Martin Van Buren. And how he had this economic downturn. It was caused by, when you study history, it was caused by Andrew Jackson's policies. And so, enter that into your calculus. Why have historians generally overlooked Andrew Jackson's economic policies? And I'll give you one reason. It's because he's a populist. He was popular with the people. He was a champion of the common man. He's a champion of the common man. Woo! And so that's one reason. Historians always looked at Jackson as this champion of the common man. He's popular. He's a populist. He's a champion of the common man. The common man has won. Woohoo! And then overlooked his economic policies, which caused an economic depression. Okay, for his successor, Martin Van Buren. So historians blame Martin Van Buren for Jackson's economic policies. And that's part of the reassessment. That's part of the reassessment of the last 25 years as well. That's part of it too. It's like, wait a minute, what about Jackson's policies? Created economic chaos. His bank war. I mean, popular with the people, but his bank war. I mean, it was a war against the U.S. economy. But anyway, so assess the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Good, bad, ugly, whatever. Historians generally love him. Even today, historians still like him, even though he has some strikes against him, I guess. But he still ranks pretty highly. He is getting reassessed, though, in this generation. The current generation of tearing down statues of people we don't like is reassessing it. And so, my opinion on Andrew Jackson, I think he's overrated. His economic policies, his economic policies are pretty bad. So there you have that. I lived in Oklahoma for 2 years. I don't think anyone should be forced to live in Oklahoma. I did live in Oklahoma for 2 years. I actually liked it. I actually like living in Oklahoma a bit. No one should be forced to live in Oklahoma. And so, the issue with Indian removal, the issue with Andrew Jackson and his Indian policy is he was changing multiple every presidential administration from Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Quincy Adams. Their policy towards Indians was negotiations. You negotiate for land. This is Indian tribe land. This is American. This is Indian. This is American. Every administration, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Monroe, I almost said Madison Monroe, and John Quincy Adams. And so his Indian policy is, and that's the thing. That's one way you can argue it without, like, I as a historian am big on understanding the past on its own terms. We don't sit here and condemn people who lived 200 years ago for not having current day attitudes. That's not fair. They didn't live today. They don't know. And so when you approach Andrew Jackson's Indian policy, you look at it from every president before Jackson. Okay, it was an established U.S. policy. Treaties. You negotiate with Indian tribes, negotiate with them. This is Indian land. This is American land. And when you study Indian removal, the Cherokee tribe won. They won some of their court cases. The Supreme Court. What did the Supreme Court do in Worcester versus Georgia? They upheld the Cherokee land, the Cherokee tribe's Indian, and negotiated treaties. And so it's a break from previous administrations' policies of these people. They've lived there. They've negotiated. They've said fine, okay, fine, we'll negotiate for the land, and they did. And so you look at it from this kind of it is, their treaties were legal and should have been honored. But they were broken, and that's what Indian removal is you're violating treaties, and established policies for the last 50 years, and so you assess Brendan Andrew Jackson, and you look at even for his time period, he was a populist. His policies were popular, Citizens in Georgia and Alabama and Florida, they wanted the Indian tribes removed. So it's popular, but are you upholding legal treaties? You negotiate with these. It's and then the Supreme Court has sided with the Cherokee tribe, and so anyway, you look at it there, and kind of what, so you assess him. But anyway, so I'll leave that to you. But anyways, the present generation, historians still like him, but he is being reassessed. Next, describe 3 religions or churches that came out in the Second Great Awakening. I did a ton of videos. I did a bunch of videos. Just pick 3 of those. You can do others. You don't have to do ones I talked about. Just describe them. It's 250 words an answer, so 3 churches into 250. Just going to talk about them. What are some interesting things about them? What do you think are important about them? Pick 3 19th century reform movements. I talked about a bunch. There's several others I didn't talk about. You can talk about those. I didn't talk about Bible societies really. I didn't do a video on women. I didn't talk about transcendentalism. So you're not limited to what I talk about. So because I'm not telling you everything. It'd be a 12-hour video, right? And so, but just pick 3 things that are important to you from your point of view. Kind of what are some of these reform movements? So I went over moral education, temperance. You can talk about anti-slavery, even though that's another lecture. You can talk about anti-slavery. That is a reform movement. I just happened to talk about it in another lecture. Utopian society, transcendentalism. So just cover it. You can, it doesn't have to be something I mentioned. But if you want to use, I've gone over a bunch of videos for that. Analyze the difference between anti-slavery and abolitionism. So just, in the lecture or the video, I gave you a table, right? Just go over that table. Right? What makes somebody anti-slavery, right? What does make somebody anti-slavery? Number one, violence. You don't think it's okay. You'd rather have slavery than social chaos. Number two, what makes you anti-slavery is your real issue is just out west. You don't want slavery out west. Okay? For an abolitionist, you think violence is okay and necessary, and you want slavery abolished everywhere, right? So like in the 1840s, if you went to the North in the 1840s, talked to 10 people, and we asked them, would you like a war? Would you like to have a war to end slavery in the South? All 10 would say, I'll say 9 out of 10 would say no. That. And so, the majority point of view in the 1850s or 1840s and the 1850s is anti-slavery. So they analyze those differences that you study. From the American West, you want to define manifest destiny and talk about it. And then in the lecture, I went over, I gave you Oregon or Texas. So you talk about either one. If you want to mention the Mexican-American War, you can. So define the term and then talk about how Texas or Oregon and the Mexican-American War are part of how do they show manifest destiny. How do they show Americans achieving their manifest destiny. Lecture 19, so you have the Compromise of 1850, Bleeding Kansas, Dred Scott. So you have 3 events that I talked about in that lecture, right? So it's just a paragraph on each and how they contributed to the sectional conflict, right? Compromise of 1850 left no one happy, right? Both sides, the pro and anti-slavery side, both sides argued what? That they'd sold out too much. They gave out too much. And so, the Compromise of 1820, everyone was happy with. Like, Henry Clay saved America. Woohoo! Compromise of 1850, you don't hear any laudatory comments about who saved America. Right? Bleeding Kansas, you have violence. And some historians call Bleeding Kansas the prelude to the Civil War. You had Northern and Southerners shooting at each other, with slavery being an issue. Dred Scott, that's a big, definite deepening of the sectional conflict, right? The Dred Scott decision, it wiped out decades of compromise. And so you want to kind of talk about how those 3 events really add to this idea of we're going to have a Civil War. It shouldn't be a surprise, right? Lecture 20, just 2 Civil War battles. In the video lecture I talked about a couple. I didn't really talk about Civil War generals. Probably the 2, everyone's probably going to pick Grant and Lee, but you can pick some obscure ones if you want. But just 2 Civil War generals, some interesting things about them. Battles they won, battles they lost. If you talk about Grant, most students you talk about Grant, talk about him drinking. College students drinking, General Grant drinking. And so there you have that. Just go through. If you need more assistance, feel free to contact me and I can talk about more things with you. And good luck. And again, if you need help, I've had students kind of email me, answer beforehand, to say, hey, am I on the right track? And I can kind of guide you a little bit to be on the right track. And there you go. Have a great day.